Where's the music coming from? Ah, found it. Hello.
Well, that's a bummer, isn't it? The one week I step outside, it all kicks off.
You should have stepped out earlier. I'm going to pause the recording for a bit with a bit of kind of confidential to the group update. Right. So
what I was going to say, Adam, is it's a useful thing is that with the data set and what you've done, we're now, something we discussed with Dave and Fred and I discussed this morning, is the fact that we're now in the position to actually have a sort of a context-based discussion about what works and what doesn't in terms of the data set and the visualization in a sort of dynamic way, because I think that's been one of the things that's been holding this back in the past. We didn't really have enough of a visualization to say, you know, there's too much of this or not enough of that, or this, you know, this is fine in the mind's eye, but actually when you put it on a screen this big or whatever, you know, it doesn't work. And these are the things we can now begin to work through.
Yeah, exactly. So just for the record, what we're talking about is the opportunity we may have with putting visual meta in papers for a conference, and Mark has done an amazing database already of current papers. So we're talking to Adam about how to best do this based on the work he's already done.
And another thing that sort of actually cropped up this morning to feed back into that, is we discussed the fact that, you know, having now got sort of shaken down the basic data set enough, that the possibility is that is that visual meta might be able to pick up the slack. So in other words, new documents in that same corpus, if they arrive with suitable visual meta, might get us around the problem of somebody having to go and effectively do an annual update or a monthly update or whatever. Exactly. And that model obviously could then be used in well, any context.
Adam, did you have a look at the blog post with that I sent around with a couple of thoughts? I'm just wondering what.
Yeah, I've read everything, and I haven't had time to respond to anything. Family duties are heavy right now. So lots of going to the beach and so on.
Life,
yeah, it's terrible. I was at the beach today, longing for the computer.
That is not a bumper sticker. I just wanted to ask you a specific question. If you could please go to the page and just look at the single bottom screenshot, which you can click on to enlarge if you want to. A question both to you and to everyone in general. It's the one where it's the author view. So there's a couple of things there. First of all, as you have seen probably, the lines to the papers, that makes sense, right? The lines from the one you've clicked on in the middle to the citations on the left and to what cites it on the right.
Yeah, if you imagine that it was more centered, maybe, so it's more clear that to the left, it's more like a cable going there, a thick cable. So if the whole box was centered, it would be more.
I think that's an interesting point, but I just wanted to highlight what is actually supposed to be in this one. It's rough. It's obviously it's not real.
Yeah.
But I think what the cool thing is, if you click on someone's name, like here we've clicked on Catherine C. Marshall, it goes bold and big and all of that. Everything else gets a bit less. But the key thing is now, obviously, all the documents in the central column are the ones she has authored.
Yeah.
And on the left is all the citations all of her papers have cited.
One thing also I touched on is at the moment I haven't normalized the author names, but I could do. I'm just wondering what would help you in a data structure sense. That
hang on, can we just do the visualization?
Sorry, yeah, sure.
Because what's behind it is obviously the key. Because what I'm just trying to highlight is on the right, anybody who cited any of her papers will be any of those documents. So this, with my crude, horrible lines, it's useless. But what you should then be able to see is, why did people in the future only cite these two papers, for instance? And then on the left, you can see that, wow, she's only really cited Doug Engelbart or whatever it might be.
But what would that visualization be? If we click on Catherine here,
So this one is-
would nothing be selected? Because the main list is a list of papers right now. Should it be something else? Should it be unselected or nothing selected and just 3 columns, you mean?
the idea is that you are already looking at Wiki, Special Hypertext Supporting Emergent Structured Documents.
Yep.
And that is bold. But if you click on one of the names of the authors, you still have that paper selected, because that author is the author of that paper as well. It just
So
means
what
that-
you, if I understand you, Fred, what you're saying is that it changes the selection, because instead of being those 3 authors, it's anything that Kathy Marshall has written with
So-
any person as
so
the
I-
inbound link.
So I think you've got a problem here in that you're mixing up your kind of modes between being in a mode where you're looking at papers and a mode where you're looking at people, right? So I would suggest, so 2 examples how to do that cleanly would be to literally have 2 different modes. So one mode, you're looking at papers. When you click on a paper, it shows you the people who authored that paper, and then it shows you the papers that cite and the papers that are cited by. And then if you click on a person, it completely changes. And now you have a list of people, and that person is selected. And inside that selection, it shows you the list of papers that person has authored. And then it shows you the people that have been cited by and the people that they cite.
So now we're basically arguing over 15 years of my life, and this is the first time I may slightly disagree with you.
So you could do it that way.
Yeah,
Right.
no, yeah, of course. Look, you're the one with the wisdom in the room. There's no question about that. But I just wanted to explain the reason for this choice. And that is,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the actual modular items of knowledge are the papers, not the people.
So
You need to be able
so
to
it-
follow the people. Yes.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's the problem. You're conflating. So the other way of doing it, is to have it as some kind of filter, so that when you click on the author, that author becomes bold. All the papers that they've authored become bold in all 3 columns, right? Now, the problem with that is it doesn't show you the citation relationships between people, but then you're not in that person mode. As you said, you're looking at papers in this mode.
Yeah, the thing is, I'm using the example, what we have learned from the visualization Adam has made is that most citations are to old papers, canonical, early, pioneering, like Doug paper, right? So what I think a user student would want to do is to find out what are the real super important papers. So that is why I'm still thinking that by clicking on the name, you are now filtering to only show that person's authored paper in the main column. But what you still really want to find out is, based on their work, what have they really cited? And those are still documents. You don't cite people, you cite papers.
Yeah.
So,
But
anyway,
But what I'm
question
not
we need
really
to have.
getting here, Frode. So if you click on an author, where should the additional citation go? The papers, the citations from not Wiki Spatial Hypertext, but from all the other papers, where should they go? Should they be in a different category, or should they not have those lines connected, or how should that be visualized? Because that is not clear to me right now.
Right. So
You
pretend
need to
that-
It has hands up.
I know. I'm just going to reply to Adam's question, and then definitely Peter. So imagine that when we're looking at this bottom screenshot, what has happened is that the user was viewing the normal view that we currently have with Wiki Spatial Hypertext supporting emergent structures being bold. It's a paper, very simple, just like it is now. It's fantastic. And then they chose to click on Catherine C. Marshall. And what happened then is that any paper in the central column that is not authored by her is hidden. That's the first thing.
That is quite straightforward, I think, conceptually.
Cool.
But the other thing, I don't understand how you think that it should expand the selection by narrowing it down. It expands. It's that conflation that I have problems with
So
conceptually,
I'll
not
explain it.
programmatically. I can solve it, but it's not, I don't get.
I'm sure you can, but imagine this, that every single paper she has written will cite things, right? So whatever it is, we put in the column on the left.
Yep.
If she cited one paper many times, that just means that the line to, let's say she cited Doug 62 paper, just for argument's sake, right? Every time she cited it, there will be a line from the paper she wrote to the Doug paper.
You're putting a weight on that edge.
Yes. So just like now, very, very crudely, I have some thin lines going down to cites, reflections on note cards and so on. Imagine that, because these are now only her papers, let's say the one that says patterns of hypertext, that goes to many of them. So it's just this kind of web that happens.
Yep.
That goes to all these documents. So I'm hoping that can give an indication of, she cited these papers from all of her papers, but this other one, she's only cited once. I think that would be a very useful thing to learn. Similarly,
It begs the question, sorry, but I know because you're about to go to Peter, but it just begs the question in context of this as whether the right-hand column then includes all the papers that include any paper that has, so regardless of her co-authors in the Vicky paper, but any paper that includes her as an author. So that also changes the right panel.
The idea is exactly that. All the papers on the right-hand column is something that cites any paper she has written. Of course, advanced things could be, you could maybe command click on Catherine, Frank, and James to have all three of them, as in it must refer to that. But basically, it just means on the right, anybody who cited any paper by Catherine Marshall will be listed, and there will be a line from that to the paper that they cited.
I think we might get it. I take Dave's point there that I suspect a wider audience might need those to be disambiguated into different spaces to give them the prompt to understand the context in which they're looking.
And what would you learn from that view?
I think what you would learn, I think it would actually be super, super useful. What you would learn is, so for instance, this one, you would see that sometimes she has cited papers often. So if from the central column to the left, there are many lines that go to one specific paper, that means that that paper is cited in all of those documents she has made. Therefore, to her, it's really fundamental to her work.
So Fred, I want to hear from Peter, who's been very patient, but just to say, I still think you've got the problem with the central column, that if you have a list of papers in the middle, it's not clear that you're selecting a person. Even if you still want papers on either side, you're either looking at people or you're looking at papers, and conflating the two is difficult.
Okay, before Peter comes in, just really briefly, this screenshot above, it says special hypertext at the top, because that's filtered by topic. There's no reason why Catherine C. Marshall couldn't be named at the top to really help with that identification issue. But yeah, Peter.
Okay, couple thoughts. First of all, we might want to use Jeff Raskin's notion of quasi-modes here. So we could take advantage of the Shift key, Control, Option, and depending upon which of those are depressed, alter the display. Also, I have a slight quibble with the notion I'm only citing papers. Lots of times, what I really want to be citing is a project or a group of people that are discussed in the paper. So in that instance, I might want to see a display that might filter the papers that I'm citing based upon the overlap of either keywords that were part of the abstract for the paper, or actually go through each paper, pull out key phrases in context, look for overlap there, and then highlight that.
If there is a mechanism, Mark, to do that, then it would be nice to be able to surface that through some kind of an interaction. But Peter, in the kind of papers you work on, how do you do that kind of citing?
Well, I'll talk about the project or the research group, but then of course you do have to anchor it in a paper somewhere. Otherwise it's just floating out there without a citation. But when I'm making the citation, I make a point to indicate that it's not so much the book that I'm talking about, but it's the underlying project or entity related to that citation, and the citation's only provided as a means of finding entry into the literature talking about the idea. But I make it very clear that it's the underlying idea or the research group or the subgroup or the project or whatever the artifact is that I'm interested in, so that it's clear that I'm not just saying, go out and read this paper for all of its content, but read this paper with a focus on that more detailed descriptor.
So one thing that's quite interesting coming out of that is you all know the concept mapping and author. So imagine in this view, if you click on a cited document in the left column, it would be very interesting if it then showed in a pop-up the sentence or paragraph where it was cited in the paper, maybe.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So I still think you've got the problem you've got here is you've got two networks, right? You've got a paper network and you've got a people network, and you're struggling about how to visualize both things at the same time.
I agree with the first half of that sentence, but not the second half, because I don't think this covers the people network. I think it covers the document network. All this view particular is doing is filtering by author rather than by title. I think that's all the difference is.
And then
So
there's the
I
underlying artifact network too, because you might have one project that itself grew out of another project or some underlying technology that gets renamed. For instance, I was talking to a colleague at University of Maryland a few years back, and I was asking, whatever happened to this particular project? And he said, oh, well, our funding line changed and it all got rebranded. So even though it's the same thing, the naming is completely different, and everything going forward doesn't mention the earlier work primarily because it wants to focus on the new funder of the project and the shifted emphasis. So there's this network of how those projects are connected to each other that aren't directly surfaced in the explicit citations.
Well, that's metadata, isn't it? Really?
Yep.
I mean, and that would have to, that will involve more curation. I mean, broadly, although I've had to hand curate this data set simply because a lot of the collection mechanisms are pretty broken at the moment, and they also slightly predate, the digital era. The latter thing that you've mentioned, which I find very interesting, but I think that would be an interesting as to how we actually sort of curate that and put it into the data set. I mean, I also mentioned in the conversation I had this morning with David and Fred about the fact that probably it would be useful in within a context like this data set to have a small p peer-reviewed sort of thematic set of keywords. What were the major sums, be it adaptive hypertext or spatial hypertext or something like that, which I would hesitate to do as a lone documenter. I definitely think you want an extra pair of eyes, and also it's actually something you probably want to run past those with a longer experience of the context you're in, be it a conference or a journal or whatever. But all those things are possible. And people have also asked about author affiliations. I'm sort of conscious that all these things get massively more complicated, and we've had enough fun trying to work out who all the authors are. I think and normalize those.
For the initial system, I think we should rely on what's in the data, just what's in the basic fields, because it's kind of rock solid. The opportunity.
Well, I must say the data set's a joy to work with, Mark. I was able to suck it into MBOL, be able, as soon as I can find a block of time, start building visualizations right off of it. It was so painless. Oh,
well, I mean, I think this is this is another thing that came up, is that there is no one right way to, we're back in the world of multiple views on the same underlying data set. I mean, to me, that's the real fun of it. So you turn it round into the question of, well, what is it, what's the form, what's the sort of structure you're trying to find here? And of course, the challenge is that for many of the people, they won't know how to build that themselves. So there's a whole interesting extra area where I think a lot of visualization tools are quite immature at the moment, in terms of, I know what the question I want to ask, and I know the data's in there, but I just don't know how to seam it together in a way that actually works. So we're doing really early steps, but I think the fun thing is I think we've now got a big enough and tight enough data set that we can start to have a quite contextualized debate about what works and what doesn't.
Going
Also, I have another feature request for all of our visualizations. Could we provide on screen a visual indicator of the configuration of the visualization? So if you do a screen capture of a representation of the data set, someone could manually type in from that what the configuration string is, and then automatically have their copy give a live rendition of that view.
Ooh, a trail by any other name.
And setting. So,
so
Dave,
just-
going back to your
Yeah.
point, where I agreed with the first half, I think it would be most unwise of me to disagree with you on any point. So even though I feel this particular view, which is just a small part of this, is actually useful, I think it would absolutely be useful to do exactly what you say.
Well,
Let me just agree with you. Let me just agree with you, Dave. So I'm just saying that in a view like this, if you have an option like a checkbox, no click box or whatever, to reconfigure, and now you've got people on the screen, I think that is absolutely worth doing. There's no
So
question about that.
just to clarify what I was saying, I wasn't saying that the thing you were trying to visualize wasn't a good idea. I was saying that you're conflating two different views of the system, which might be confusing. So you have to think of a way of unconflating them all. So I'll give you an example. When you said about showing the thickness of the lines to the sites set, for example, it's like, okay, now I can see what you're trying to do. You're trying to show the relationship between individuals and papers, but that's the site set, but the cited by set doesn't reflect that, right? Because every single line on the cited by set is only weight 1, because every paper can only weight this paper once. I suppose you could weight how many times it is possible for a paper to cite the same author multiple times, right? But it, that's going to be rare. An alternative visualization would be to say, well, show me the people and show me how often they have cited this person. So that would show the people citation networks. But you've got all of this stuff going on, and I wonder whether you might be better off just sticking to one core subject of the visualization, right? Rather than having the people. So you could, for example, you want some consistent behavior. So if you have papers in the middle, papers to the left, papers to the right, to sound like the song, and then if you click on anything, right, it effectively acts as a filter on the set, where the filter just changes the presentation. So click on a person, all the papers written by that person are highlighted. Click on a keyword, all the papers that have that keyword are highlighted, right? That feels to me like a much more consistent way of managing it. Yeah.
The only difference between what you're saying and what I'm saying, I think, is that currently if you click on the name of the author, you hide the other papers that isn't authored by them. You're saying they should be highlighted, the ones that are.
Well, I'm saying you're also doing some other stuff. So you're bringing in extra papers to the left and right? So the left-hand column is all the papers they have cited, and the
Yes.
right-hand column is all the papers that have cited them.
In every piece of work they've ever done.
Yeah.
Because imagine this, here's a student going to University of Southampton, and they meet Les Carr for the first time, and they're very intimidated. And one of the first things they want to do is to find all the papers Les Carr has cited. This would provide them that very, very quickly. And
Yeah.
it would allow them to go the other way. So, okay, who's actually cited my new advisor, to go that way. But either way, I think we are arguing something that I'm going to take a long time to understand the difference of. But I do think we should take entirely your approach as well and make a people view out of this. I think that would be very, very useful in and of itself.
I mean, I personally, I think that, well, any view is interesting because it's such a fascinating data set. But I think that the paper view is the more valuable one, right? So again, just to be clear, I'm not advocating a people view. I'm saying that what you are doing is trying to incorporate a people view into the paper view, and that's why it's causing confusion, right? And if you really want to do that, so actually, initially I'd misunderstood what you wanted to do. I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to capture the relationship between people and papers, right?
Well, I'm just using people as one of the filters because we have filters by other types. Just for reality check, Adam, the lines that have been mocked up going from the papers cited into the papers being viewed, Is that a big deal for you to implement? Because it would be interesting to see if it actually is a useful visual or not.
It's hard to say big deal because computer, it's the first 50% is not a big deal, but the next 300% is a big deal. So getting the first lines up there, and but then there are always edge cases when things expand and selections change in the middle. You said that they were going to change, then I have to recalculate all. There are many, so getting some basic lines to show in a demo setting is one thing. Having something stable that works when Mark is zooming into the page or changing font sizes or yeah, you know, the usual stuff with the software development. It really so many edge cases when you're doing visualization, but it's, yeah, getting the first few lines up. I do it in other projects and it's doable. But the important thing is, how much do they give you? If a paper is selected and the citations is very close by, on this, what are the individual lines really giving you? Or should it be more of a bridge to the whole set, the whole list? You know the Ted Nelson connect the bridges things, thicker lines connecting the whole set and the whole paper, because that is maybe a bit more true to the data.
I mean, from my point of view, I think there are things that you can do which are more valuable and which are easy to do. So that last screenshot where you've started to differentiate the years. So you block the years and you show the years, right? So when something was published is really important, right? And if you did that on the left and right column as well, that would also be very helpful. Okay. And then I mentioned this morning, but I haven't said in this meeting, being able to see the abstract of these papers, I think in the visualization is critical, because you might want to understand, oh, that looks interesting, but is it relevant? And then having a further step, so having the DOI link to take you off to where that paper actually lives, which in this case is all going to be the digital library, that's also going to be invaluable. So if you know what would be the most valuable thing to do, I would say you would get 80% of the value from having a chronological ordered list of things with just papers where you're able to read abstracts and jump off into the DL, right? I think that would be amazing. Right, and in a sense, you don't need more than that, right, in order to demonstrate the worth of the data set. And then you're right that there's all these extra things you might want to do, right, where you kind of look at the relationships between people, or you look to see, okay, well, are there a set of papers that this person is relying on specifically for their research? The stuff that Peter was talking about sort of understanding the relationship between papers that represent a conceptual body of work. Right, so you know, this paper you're looking at here, the Wiki paper, this is the early spatial hypertext work, right? And actually, that information is there in the network if you could try and extract it out, right? But that all to me feels like you know, what you might call stretch goals stuff, right? That your core bread and butter is paper, chronology, abstracts, relationships, right? And that wonderful navigation of just being able to click on any paper and jump to that place in the list and follow the citation graph in that way. That's incredibly valuable. So don't lose sight of that, trying to think about the more advanced stuff that might follow.
What are the possibilities to get 10 papers open in some way? To having a small set of papers, a handful of papers that can be sample papers, open access, very open access papers that not really requiring a login or anything, but having 10 papers or 2 papers or even just 1 paper being open, so we can show that if you're either logged in as an ACM user, or if or just to try it, showing a paper inline, because I can bring that PDF directly into the interface if just popping up inside the web browser as a small.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, isn't there? So first of all, the DOI, remember, doesn't take you to the PDF in the DL, it takes you to the DL page.
I can fix that.
And the DL pages, well, I think that's fine actually, because the DL page is open and may also have some interesting information on it that you want to look at. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think probably certainly in the last 10 years, the majority of the papers will be freely available online somewhere. So the copyright with the ACM allows you to put a personal author's copy on your institutional site, right? So for example, all of my papers in here would be on the Southampton ePrint server somewhere, but presumably you don't have that URL in the dataset, Mark, right?
No, but we could work to build that if that was, you know.
And are those places linkable, or do you need to go through some sort of portal page to
No,
get
they're all deep linked, so you direct URL to the
Yeah.
to theoretically to the page in the repository or to the paper. Yeah.
We could experiment with, I mean, again, we may not be able to do it for the whole set, but we could experiment. I could, you know, take some of Dave's papers, for instance, and put in, you know, even if it's just only a couple of records in that column, we could do that as a build thing. I've also put in the sidebar for Adam. I think I've got a quite simple way that if you wanted to experiment with search on author, because the way I've done the authors, where I've broken them out, and where an author has more than one name variant, I've normally chosen the longest and most grammatically correct, so i.e. with accents and everything, version of the name, and then put all the other records under it. So what I can do is, you know, for sake of argument, I put in the sidebar that if there's a paper that's by D.E. Millard, I could just put it in that same author sort of slug, in parentheses, David E. Millard. The point being that the one in brackets is your search term. So if you wanted to find all the papers by David E. Millard, that might not be the author name as per the paper, you know, in the strict paper metadata, but it is a term that ought to find all that author's paper within the data set. And that's a fairly low tech way of doing it.
I have to duck out, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for doing this work, and thanks, Adam. It's a wonderful visualization. It was really interesting to look at. And so when you have a URL that you're happy for me to circulate to people in the conference, then let me.
Yeah, I'll work something out with Mark here, I think, and he'll put it in a folder somewhere, and we can look at it, and then we can move it to hypertext when it's more polished and ready. And I also have a slight variation to show today, but you may miss that then, David. But you can look at what you record.
Get me up to speed, but anyway, that's great. It was nice to see everybody.
I'll send you a link to the recording, Dave, so you can skip through it later when you have a chance.
Awesome. Thanks, Fredo. Cheers then. Bye.
Nice meeting you, David.
I was just going to mention a design consideration, see what you guys feel. And that is, it's very, very easy in these visualizations to show which are the most popular and cited papers. And that's very often where the demo goes. I think it would be an interesting challenge for us to do the opposite, to help a student, defined as anybody who's trying to learn this data set, cite a new paper, something within the last 5 to 10 years, which is a very different challenge, where we can help them find a little snippet of something cool. Let's put it honestly, simply, plainly, to support their fellow students who may have published in this, and to put them in a relevant way. Just a little thought to put out there. Because it's a different tool set need, isn't it?
Well, if the thing that Dave mentioned, that if the right-hand column of in the 3-column format that we were looking at had effectively a year delimiter, yeah, obviously what you do is you'd look in the inbound links on the right down at the bottom, would show you certainly the most recent links in that thematic thing. One of the things we're missing is this thing that I don't want to lowball in terms of the author keywords. Certainly in this set proved to be not very useful, but if there was within the community some sort of peer-reviewed stranding of the data, that would also get very interesting, because if you were sticking with the example, if you're in the spatial hypertext area, basically seeing what's most recent in the spatial hypertext.
Just quickly before Peter, since you're so polite with the hand and not just butting in, do you guys know what nonce words are? I only learned about nonce words the other day, for the ones who are not shaking your head. Nonce words are basically keywords and special words used in that paper, but only in that paper. you know, in my case, it might be visual meta or whatever I'm introducing. So yeah, absolutely entirely useless until it becomes a huge success for somebody. So, you know, in terms of the danger of relying on author keywords and stuff. Yeah, Peter?
Okay, I was thinking that it'd be really nice to have some sort of a visualization that just focused on the future work section of papers. I'd love to be able to see what commonalities are in the community's comments on what they think the next steps should be and pull that. I think that'd be especially helpful for students.
That's really interesting. Yes, thanks for that. Adam and Alan has joined us. Or you may have been here, but below the fold, Alan, sorry. Yeah, Adam?
I have a small visualization tweak for the timeline. I wanted to run it by you, but should we do that later and try to keep Alan, do you have something more on point here, or?
Well, it was a small, very quick point, but I just wanted to comment. I like Frode's direction there, almost going for the counterfactual, going for the opposite approach in what you normally see in you know, sorting through papers. And with that, has there been any pragmatic talk about using ML to help with discovery? And I don't mean like active models. Okay, well, that was something it may be easier. It's oftentimes, at least in this case, I think it would be much easier than what we normally think of with ML, because it's a secure, stable data set. It doesn't have to be like, we don't have to generate a pipeline. You could just run it, get the results, find out the novelty of certain papers based on, you know, how similar is it to these, you know, this whole bulk, and then what are the novel bits, and then that could help us with your goal of honing in on those unusual papers that no one's seen.
Yeah,
For what it's worth, I
it's
do
something I'll
have
look into.
I have got all the PDFs, and where possible, I've extracted a plain text export. The problem is a lot of it's early OCR and a lot of it is full of. So in other words, without significant cleaning, which seems to be a meta problem within the ML area.
Yeah.
So in other words, getting to the start point of having a clean data set, because it's taking me at best speed 15 minutes of paper. I did some trials, but I reckon to do a proper clean and find out, you know, the missing, all the ligature related and hyphen stuff and all that, which ML will be broadly blind to, was taking me about 15 minutes of paper. And we got 1,000 in this, just to this small set.
Okay,
So
maybe there are other ways to skin that cat that don't require
Sure.
cleaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Adam, show us.
Yeah, this was a kind of a crazy experiment on the timeline, quite a short one, so it's not polished in any way. So let's see, how do you share things? Let's start. So let's see. Do you see the screen?
Yeah, very well.
I still call bar list everything called bar list diagram. So here is a version where things fly down to it. So you hover to see the small minimal, kind of tooltip view for quick reading or scanning. And things, when I click on something, it flies there, but the old version also flies to the side. So this is kind of a visual history, because I hate when I lose my place. I just want to browse something and then I want to go back. So the animations needs to be better, and they may not really show here in a zoom.
No, we can see it's actually quite smooth.
So it's you just click around and get the fly away, and ideally it should be you should be able to browse the whole history. Now it just flies out off screen and lost forever, but you get the idea that you could click them, and these should be objects, kind of objects that you can manipulate, move around on screen, and drop them into your collection. So a good principle, I think, for you interaction design is that you really make objects of things you can play with, move around, drop, collect, and in a more physical way. So you work with your hands here. you really take those objects. So when it leaves the something leaves the list here, the full timeline view, it becomes an object that you work with, that you can take. And so it doesn't, it's not really hiding things, but it's moving and morphing things. The actual, yeah. So you see that they fly to the right place, and then they become, yeah.
Super nice.
So this is a direction I generally want to go. It's more work, but we should do more work. It doesn't have to be very complicated, because sometimes doing 10 different views is more work than having one view in a more flexible
On that note,
way.
Adam, what would be really interesting is to be able to go between these completely different views. So for instance, when you're looking at finding links, to have some kind of a button or whatever in there that loads it in the different view we looked at earlier,
Yeah.
to go back to this depending on your need. But it will load that actual document as the active thing when you switch between them, right?
I imagine that if you click 1997, then we don't need the rest of the timeline. We go into the long list that we saw last time, or the other view, long list with the papers, and you see the citations on the side, for example.
Yes.
And same with if you click an author name, either they get highlighted here, or the papers by that author as a filter, but it could also go into a regular list. So we have to explore here what the good versions are.
Wonderful.
Over.
Alan?
Yes, love it. And this is great, Adam. This I had not yet replied to you about what I brought up earlier about the kind of the hover deep problem. But this is a platform to speak about it, right? This is really great. The thing about hover or even detail view that I see across the board is problematic is that we have different cadences of memory, when we're searching around, and there doesn't seem to be many interfaces that acknowledge that. So what that might look like would, you've already got some of that here. And in addition, there might be almost like a faded heat map of the things that I've zoomed around and just sort of touched. So I have a memory of that, even if it goes away. Another one would be if I click or show interest and that it comes down on the bottom, or if I hover for an extended time, whatever, maybe I see a bar of the associated tags for that article, which I could then kind of pin that tag as if to say, weigh this more in what I'm looking at. And kind of like, that's another way of saying that's memory. Like, I want to move around, but I don't want to forget this little tag, but I don't want to filter it entirely by that tag. I just want to kind of not forget it. Those
Just
kinds of.
Twist the view for a second.
Exactly. Anamorphic. Those kinds of tools, I think, or design patterns would be really useful for someone who's overwhelmed by the amount of material, and they want to just sort of pick through it without jumping right into the rabbit hole, without dedicating themselves to that. That's it.
Mark, Peter, I don't know. Mark?
Quick one, really, just to sort of say in passing, because something that came up in a conversation this morning for those who weren't there was that also we were thinking that because this, we're in this world of views, the data underneath multiple potential views was being able to think about not this second, but just to have in mind that you might want to, for instance, effectively having found this skein of interrelated papers, you might want to say drag that off into a discrete spatial hypertext so that you can play with that graph. So so the data's there underneath, and I wouldn't want to do it in this view because it would overcomplicate it. But I mention it because only in case and if it has an impact on the way we structure the data. Because one of the things I'm quite conscious of is, as well as our ability to make the visualization deep and rich, wants us to keep thinking about the maintainability and the structure of the metadata, so we're collecting it correctly. That's me.
On that, Mark, before we go to Peter and Raphael, just really briefly, Adam, could you possibly put a button in here that says, open this view in a new window? So you could have another window on the side, continuing with this, all the states are there, and then in this window, you could keep changing it.
The other thing to bear in mind is I don't know at what point one's browser sort of dies in a heap. I mean, I know that's in a way
we'll
just
figure
a
that out.
technical thing. Just go and buy a bigger computer. But I think it's something we need to bear in mind because it is a real world aspect of it.
Yeah, I don't think that is a problem here. In a way, we underestimate how much graphics the computers can handle. You can run, a lot more than this, a lot more without a problem on a regular computer. Mine is from 2013. My development machine, so it's fine, at least on my computer.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just typing notes here, so please just decide amongst yourself who to talk next. Rafael, I guess, sorry.
Sure. So I just wanted to Alan's point on the content. I also think that it's important to have different views because you're either exploring the content and extract the information from the heat map, or you're diving deep into what it is you want to find. So I would find it extremely valuable to that view being the starting point. You have all the years, you have all of the papers, the heat maps, and then the second view would be the one specific year. So let's say I want to look into the year 2004. So then everything from 2004 would be bigger so that I can see all of the conferences from 2004, all the papers. And then the next view would be, one specific paper. And then I could dive even deeper into that specific paper to see more information. And then a possible second, another alternative view would be from the person who wrote the paper or who presented. And that way I could see all of the things that person has published as well.
So how
it's always a deep dive.
So Rafael, how do you imagine that? Would that be something you zoom into kind of and it fades out, or is it a completely new kind of a page or a very different view, or how do you make that transition? So
I imagine it just being immersive, like you added the cards at the bottom, compiling references. I just imagine the column going to the left, and then you would have an open space for that deep dive. So it's always kind of a zoom in, zoom out, and then things would just either move to the left or move down, or create space for the content to appear.
Thoughts on that? That we were thinking the same thing, Raphael. I just threw it in chat, but I'll wait my turn.
Peter?
Okay, I'd suggest taking a look at the perspective wall visualizations that Xerox PARC did in the mid-1980s, and also take a look at the timeline visualization that the MIT Media Lab developed for the chat circles papers. That was a vertical timeline with short horizontal bars representing how much conversation was happening at different points in time. Something along that line could let us very rapidly scroll back and forth through our history of exploring the interface. So imagine if instead of those little bars representing communications between users in the chat dialogue, they represented the different manipulations of the user interface. So if you were zipping around a lot, that could represent a thicker bar at that point in time. So you could then go back and then using the perspective wall approach, stretch that area out when you focused in on it. So you'd be able to move temporally through your explorations and get back to it. And you'd also have a sense of where you were lingering that way too. So the interstitial space between when you were manipulating the interface would indicate how long you were lingering and reading the content at the previous spot. So that could help you go forward and backwards in your exploration of the data set. Another thought, completely unrelated, but I wanted to throw it out before I forgot it, is that it would be good for us to start thinking about finding a second community outside of hypertext that we could get to adopt visual meta. Now,
One step at a time. This is really stressful, Peter, but go ahead.
I think it might be a good time to start trying to do some preliminary outreach. And in that respect, I'm also moving academically into the foresight community. And there are a handful of major organizations, one representing foresight practitioners, another one representing foresight academics. And the leaders in those groups have been starting to talk about the goal of having a platform to provide entry into their academic discipline. So maybe I can get in contact with them and see if we might be able to talk them into adopting this technology. Because one of the things they're talking about is helping new people to foresight find the important papers to read. That was actually like a topic that was popping up in the discussion. So there might be a window for outreach to get them as the first early adopters outside of the hypertext community. And of course, once people see that someone outside of our academic subfield are considering the technology to be valuable, the chances of it getting traction out in the wider community increase dramatically.
Yeah, Peter, I agree in principle, and Raphael and Alan are up to speak. I just wanted to say that let's get this clean first.
Working for us first, of course.
Yeah.
So we have something, real to show rather than another concept. Raphael and Alan, I don't know, fight.
Oh my! Let me lower my hand. But I did send a file on the chat of a possible animation of how that can work.
Cool. And Peter, I'd love to get, if you could find the links to what you're mentioning about the Xerox PARC and MIT. I'd love to see that.
Sure, I'll try to track that down.
Just a quick thing about the zooming. Yeah. And great. Glad that we have this interface up. I was thinking like, and maybe we all are, zooming in a Prezi sense is just god awful. Where you've actually sort of like, you have you've zoomed in, but you have the very same X and Y axes. It's just much larger, and the intentions are great, but it never feels actually usable. So I was thinking like, if you and be it zoom, be it like scroll in or whatever, if you got close, if you showed that intent that you wanted to actually see the page titles or something, zooming into the other view that you have in the other tab would mean millisecond.
Which one? This one.
This one, yeah. It
Yep.
would mean a millisecond change, almost just a parlor trick of saying, hey, I'm going to zoom into the stack of articles and then switch that over to this interface. So the rules of the interface change, meaning like you're not going to go left and right to see the timeline of years. If you say, I want to go into this view, you're actually saying, I want to look at things this way, and I could keep scrolling down and go through the years, and it'd be fun. I'm not going to say it's anywhere close to essential. I'm not even sure what kind of job it does, but as far as blending that, I almost see three views that we've been talking about, and it doesn't matter exactly where you start. This might be the starting place, and then you see that there's a way to scroll back, and you suddenly see the timeline view. Oh, great! Additionally, there might be a way to not necessarily scroll in deeper, but to say, I want to focus on one article or a hand selection of articles that I want to just parse through versus this form of viewing, and then the timeline. Okay, that's it.
I'll throw in one other thing that also came up in the side chat that might just be interesting for people to mull on. And we touched on the aspect, it came about because we talked about sort of, canonical versions of author names and things, but the issue of sort of linked data, my gut feeling was we want to keep that sort of slightly anti-human complexity at arm's length. And I don't think so this goes back to how we create the metadata for this and put it into these sort of visualizations, so that we do it in a way that doesn't make it difficult to branch into more formalized linked data, but at the same time avoiding sort of basically technology creep, where we end up with something that's beautiful for the machine, but once again, totally broken for the humans.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're over time, but I think that's something most of us can deal with because this is very important. I think now we should do something that is really, really difficult for this group, and I don't think we've ever managed to do before. And that is talk about practical things. So Dave Millard will now talk to these people in this organization soon. So we need to talk to you, Adam, about what can you realistically do in a day or two? Because that's all we have for that.
Oh, wow.
Is there anything that we feel strongly will make the point visually? Because I do think he should show both of these visualizations, because the point, Alan, you weren't here earlier, the point of introducing this is not to sell any one visualization. It's to sell the fact that with this data set and Visual Meta, people can build different visualizations. That's why it has to be two and not one. So I'm just going to start with a few questions to Adam, and then everybody just pile in and overload his brain. In the view we're looking at now, Adam, how likely is it you can start doing some of those lines? Just, you know, as in, so here, for instance, there will be a line to Sun's link and expanding the notion of links from the center of hypertext by link resolving components.
Frode,
That's me.
before we jump into that, and I apologize that I missed this stuff, but I mean, that's blowing my mind alone that you're saying 2 days. Could you give me a quick review as to like, what does that mean?
I'll pause the recording. Just to record the last bit. So we've agreed just internally, Adam sharing code, and Mark and Adam are putting up the work so far so that it can be accessed. But so here's the other thing. Alan asked, who is it for and what's the point? And those kind of brilliant questions in more detail. But of course, the key thing here is that we can build different visualizations for different uses, right? So for instance, I talked earlier, I want to have a visualization that helps a student learn, but also to cite relatively recent work. So maybe I'll have some idea what that view should be. Maybe we should also think someone wants to follow the people, whatever it might be. But, you know, let's remember, we're not building one visualization here. That's all.
Well, this strikes me so much like the earlier conversation about, and you know, the thing about, you know, tools like Tinderbox, which are effectively a tool set rather than a process. It's a tool set to make your own process. And the interesting, challenging part of the communication challenge here is to take loads of people who are only ever used to being told what the computer will let them do. You know, if you put the right stuff in the right boxes in the right order, magic will happen. And that's about their relationship with apps. You know, these people aren't coders. They have really interesting tasks to do. They have really complicated problems to solve. But their relationship with the tool is very much where they're told what they're allowed to do. And this is rather turning it on its head. I said, no, we know you have exciting questions, but you know, you don't need the same visualization as the guy on the next desk. You need something. And so there's there's some opening up here. I don't think the lines are yet laid down, and that's, I think, one of the exciting parts about this. We're not yet constrained by a sort of best practice or anything.
Agreed that experimentation, understanding what's possible in play is really critical before these you know, outside processes come in and make arbitrary, you know, we make formalities. It's still good to come up with a couple of hypotheses, you know, even if we even decide that this isn't going to solve their job, but coming up with some hypotheses of what jobs might be done or need to get done by student, by whomever, so we know where this kind of repo, whatever these views fit into their flow, could then help us prioritize things like adding a year date over adding strings to, you know, etc. Anyway.
It's all very exciting and quite stressful.
I posted a link to some videos on a system called Fastcase, and they are currently the leading user interface developers for access to legal research, and they have some interesting visualizations. So taking a look at that might give you a few ideas to see how an industry-based implementation of linkages in a digital library looks like currently.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
So what do you think the balance should be between trying out new visualizations, completely different ways of visualizing it, and polishing what we have already, like the two views, refining it?
My vote is
We
don't
had some
Polish.
Yeah.
Forget Polish.
but even adding a few lines and or navigation by time or author and so on, it's not polish, it's functionality, of course. But
Are you thinking of making
because
it
there are
completely
other
new view?
Huh?
Are you thinking about making completely new view?
Yes. So if I haven't shown you my good views yet. So this was so yeah. But there are other interfaces
Just
that could be.
show us, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Some of them are related to what I do. So it's that is a bit more tricky. To should I what code to to put into or what ideas to put into it.
But I think pushing the openness of this, the fact that really there, so there isn't, the starting point is there isn't an answer to this. There will be, the different visualization, different approaches. The one thing I think knowing how we got to here with the data set, I would bang on about though, is we need to make sure that anything we're thinking about on the visualization end is practically supportable at the metadata end. Because it took me 4 years to pull this data set together and get it into a reasonable state. Now a lot of that was discovery, and somebody could do it more, it's partly the age of some of the information and the bits are all over the place and yada, yada. But nonetheless, what I did learn from it is it's not as simple as, I can see someone look at this and right, I'll just put a whole of chi into this and they'll probably find it won't quite work. Yeah. They'll get a lot more data, they'll have a bigger data set, but they'll have all the holes that still they'll have to sweat. So that's part of the other pattern and part of the gift to the community, I think, that comes out of this, is to sort of say, okay, we're exporting some of the generic problems associated with collecting ongoing, temporal sets of data that will underlie exploratory tools. And I think that's quite a powerful thing to crack.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, I agree with Mark, and I'm sure everybody has opinions, but I would love to see the lines, the beige design is something I designed in 2016, and it's been updated a little bit. So for my personal joy and satisfaction, I would love to see that grow. It makes me really happy. However, what we are selling here is not ourselves a software developing company, even though you are brilliant. We are selling, here's an approach that allows lots of different things to happen. So I would love if you do something completely crazy as well.
Until tomorrow.
Yeah, of course.
You
want more time.
Outside of the interface, just this is already taken care of. Again, sorry if I'm beating a dead horse, but if you feel like it would be helpful to have any material that is outside of the specific interface, but show how a user might access, traditional site versus this and what they could get out of it, tell the story visually in some kind of way. I'm happy to help with that. It might make it easier to say, oh, here's how I'm supposed to look at what I'm, the interfaces I'm looking at. Here's how I'm supposed to frame it.
And I think probably the general timeline for that is this is probably going to come together associated with an event that's going to be at the end of September. So some parts are moving already, are moving into place already, but we've got a little bit more time to do some of that explanatory work as well.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know this was such a quick timeline with the turnaround. This is so exciting. Sorry to be jumping in ad hoc as I do, but it's always fun. So thank you for letting me sit in.
Oh, no, it's great. These are open office hours, and the passion for this is what matters. And things either happen or certainly everything happens at once. That's the universe.
No, it's great. It happens. And when I think I've been sweating this thing so long, with people saying, yeah, but what's the point? And then Adam overnight comes back and says, well, how about this then? I think I almost fell off my chair.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I would love to tinker with the data set in Svelte. Just I've got some time this week, so as a totally unrelated.
I also responded to Alan on Circle. So if you want a separate thing that I'd sort of let slip was if you want to look and talk about Tinderbox, that's fine. I'm guessing you're East Coast, aren't you?
Yes.
So kind of, I guess I mean, would sometimes, well, we can pick it up via another channel, but I mean, if tomorrow I'm definitely free my afternoon, your sort of morning, or even
Yeah, that would be great.
yeah.
Did you-
I'll hit you up via another channel.
I just remember there was an interview in Edge magazine by the developers of Crysis many years ago. And they said making AI bots wasn't that hard. The secret was to make everything in the environment know what it is, which is of course the whole idea behind visual meta. And that is what we're demonstrating here, that, you know, these different things on the screen, there is the data there that Mark has put into it. But it makes me think, there was a tweet that I retweeted today from Scholarcy, where they turn papers into graphs. You know, we're all a bit tired of graphs, but what he did was, you know, you can compare two documents, and we've all seen that too. But Adam, imagine for the near future, where in whatever view you have, you take one document, you drag it onto another, and that then explodes them into two different graphs where you have, you know, correspondences or whatever. So suddenly you're just comparing these two documents. You know, because the data is there, we can afford to think like that.
Can I throw something out on that? Because this is what I've been thinking about and tinkering with for whatever 5 years or whatnot, these kinds of problems. So if we have the data, I would love to see, this is a simplistic example to convey it, but take a 2x2 and you determine what you want the X and Y axis to be, to say like, I don't know, hypertext versus graphs. And then the Y axis to be, you know, some other arbitrary dimensions. And then from there, papers populate as to where they fit in proximity to these terms that you've come up with. Now you can actually search a corpus in ways that haven't been sort of imagined before. You're just saying like, you know, either you want to hit right in the crosshairs, or maybe you actually want the ones that are over to the side because they're sort of related, but weirdly, you know, and then you can change those parameters very quickly. It really suddenly becomes that kind of anamorphic graph idea where you're essentially taking that graph database and looking at it this direction, and now you see newer dimensions. You know, those kinds of things I would love to build and iterate the thought on.
We have to do that. We have to do that. I've been focused on the individual document, of course, but to be able to go in and out of these views, you have one document. You can do some things in Reader. It's pretty primitive, but you should be able to explode the document too, to see it in richer ways, and then to extend that beyond the horizon to do what you're talking about. You come across an interesting phrase in a document, you know, you lift that into a space where you say, based on this corpus, not the entire universe of information, you know, where does it fit? I already have this view saved. This is my hypertext view versus spatial hypertext. You know, so you can bring, do you remember OpenDoc? You know, you have a space, you bring in the tool. You know, we are beginning to make something like that happen, because Adam's tools are independent of the data, right? It's not a
Right. Of course, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
That's
I
awesome.
have a meeting with someone I have to get ready for, I'm afraid. Are you guys, do you need more time? Because I can leave it running.
No, I need to nip away for a second, but I'll follow up with Alan and Adam directly by some means.
Are we all following each other on the Twitters?
Well, I need to step away for a second. If Alan's still here for a moment, I can come and talk about it tomorrow. If you need to go.
I've got a little bit of time. If
Okay,
everyone else is,
we'll be back in a second.
Right. Yeah, I have an interesting, completely different thing. Anyway, this is all very
we're still
exciting.
recording, so.
Yeah, no, I know. I saw that. Yeah, I remember. Do you remember? So not remember. Do you guys know the American Michael? What's his name? The British comedian Michael
Palin?
Hmm?
Michael Palin?
No, not that classic. But anyway, I read his book because he did a kind of a cool digital book, and his story was basically hard work, success. But in the middle, there's a really interesting sentence, and that is working as a comedian. He first started out at all kinds of bars and holiday centers, but he said that, you know, they wanted whatever, they weren't interested in comedy. They were there for general stuff. So if you want to be taken seriously as a comedian, you have to go to the best comedy clubs, because that is where you will be acknowledged or not. And I think this community we're building here is exactly that, for each other. You know, most people don't give a monkeys about this stuff, but we are here with people who have passionate opinions and sometimes disagree. But I think it is amazing to be building a space together where we can deeply listen and have strongly held perspectives, and it's not all just new. So kind of super lovely.
Yeah, it's been wild to see even the different, there's like, I don't know, who knows, more than 2 groups like this that are just small collections of people who meet semi-regularly talking about roughly the same kind of stuff from a different aspect. And
Yeah,
it's exciting to see.
And they're beginning to come together. And one thing that makes me immensely proud is when I pop into these other groups, you know, every once in a while, someone will hold up a copy of The Future of Text. You know, so, you know, having something published, having a thing, you know, helps connect the community. So that's all good. Right, got to run. I'll leave this running. I will end it only for me, and see you guys hopefully on Friday.
See you Friday, Frode.
Bye.
Right, sign and leave Mark as